Marcus sold my masterpiece for $200 again, the same painting that had taken me 3 months to complete. The familiar sting of betrayal pierced through me as I watched him pocket the cash from our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who thought she was getting a student's practice piece. But this time felt different. This time I remembered. I was reborn with the bitter knowledge of how this story would end. Him stealing my artistic legacy while I remained invisible, unrecognized, broke. The scent of turpentine still clung to my fingers from last night's work session, and now that acrid smell seemed to mock me. The memories crashed over me like a violent tide. In my previous life, I had trusted Marcus completely. He was my boyfriend, my partner, my champion, or so I believed. He convinced me that he understood the art world better than I did, that his connections could help us both succeed. What a fool I had been. I remembered dying alone in that cramped studio apartment, surrounded by canvases I'd never gotten credit for. The newspapers had called Marcus a rising star in contemporary art, praising his emotionally complex paintings. My paintings. While I wasted away from pneumonia, too proud to call the ambulance because I couldn't afford the bill, Marcus was celebrating his first gallery opening across town. The sound of rain had drummed against my window that final night, the same rhythm I heard now as I watched him counting Mrs. Chen's crumpled 20s. The irony was almost beautiful in its cruelty. Every piece he'd built his reputation on came from my hands, my heart, my sleepless nights. The painting of my grandmother's hands, the one that made critics weep with its raw emotion, he'd told everyone it represented his own family legacy. The abstract series about childhood trauma that launched his career, those were my nightmares, made manifest in color and texture. He'd stolen not just my art, but my pain, packaging it as his own experience for the consumption of wealthy collectors who nodded knowingly at his authentic voice. Now I trembled as I stood in the doorway watching this betrayal unfold again. My fists clenched so tightly that my nails bit into my palms. But this time, I wouldn't be the naive girl who believed in love and trust and artistic partnerships. This time, I knew exactly what kind of snake I was dealing with. Marcus. My voice cut through the casual conversation he was having with Mrs. Chen about supporting young talent. He turned, and I saw the flash of annoyance cross his features before he smoothed it into his practiced, charming smile. Hey, babe. I was just explaining to Mrs. Chen how this piece would be perfect for her living room. Mrs. Chen beamed at me. Your boyfriend is so sweet, helping you get your work out there. $200 is very reasonable for such a lovely painting. The words felt like glass in my throat. Reasonable. For a painting that had consumed 3 months of my life, that contained techniques I'd spent years perfecting, that poured out the grief of losing my grandmother. $200. Actually, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, I think there's been a mistake about the pricing. Marcus's smile tightened. We discussed this, remember? You're still building your portfolio. These are essentially practice pieces. Practice pieces! The same words he'd used in my previous life before selling my work to private collectors for thousands. The rough texture of the doorframe bit into my shoulder as I leaned against it, anchoring myself to the present moment. Mrs. Chen, I said carefully, would you mind if Marcus and I discuss this privately first? I'd hate for there to be any confusion about the piece. She looked between us, sensing the tension. Of course, dear. I'll just wait in the hallway. The moment she stepped out, Marcus's mask slipped entirely. What the hell are you doing? I had that sale locked up. My painting. My sale to approve. Each word felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. It's practice work, Maya. You'll make better pieces. This is about building relationships, not maximizing profit on amateur paintings. Amateur. In my previous life, that word had made me shrink, made me doubt my worth. Now it just made me angry. I watched him pocket Mrs. Chen's money like he owned it, like he owned me. The expensive watch on his wrist caught the light, a new addition that hadn't been there yesterday. How many of my paintings had paid for that little luxury? Show me the contract that gives you the right to sell my work, I said quietly. He blinked, clearly not expecting this pushback. We're partners, Maya. Everything we create, we share. That's how relationships work. Then why isn't your name on the painting? Because, he floundered for a moment, because it's better for your development if buyers know it's your work. I'm thinking of your future. Such beautiful lies. He'd always been good at those. In my previous life, I'd wanted so desperately to believe them that I'd ignored every red flag, every inconsistency. The scent of his cologne, expensive, musky, used to comfort me. Now it made my stomach turn. I want the painting back, I said. That's ridiculous. I already took Mrs. Chen's money. Then give her the money back. His face flushed red. You're being completely unreasonable. This is sabotage, Maya. If you can't trust me to handle the business side of your art, then maybe we need to reconsider this whole arrangement. The threat hung in the air between us. In my previous life, those words would have sent me into a panic. The thought of losing him, of being alone with my art and no connections, no support system, it would have broken me. I would have apologized, begged him to keep the sale, promised to trust his judgment. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I had lived through the consequences of that fear, had died with the knowledge of what his support really cost. You're right, I said, my voice steady as stone. Maybe we do need to reconsider some things. That night, after Marcus had reluctantly returned Mrs. Chen's money and spent an hour sulking about my sabotage, I waited until his breathing evened out in sleep. The soft clicking of my camera became my weapon of choice as I methodically photographed every painting in our shared studio space. Each flash illuminated another piece of evidence. The portrait series I'd completed over the summer. The landscape collection he'd been shopping around to galleries. The abstract pieces that had taken me months to perfect. In my previous life, I'd had no documentation, no proof of my process. He'd been smart about that, always suggesting we focus on the spontaneous creativity rather than getting bogged down in paperwork. Now I understood that his casual dismissal of documentation had been entirely strategic. Without proof of process, without clear attribution, my art became his art by default. Who would believe the quiet girlfriend over the charismatic artist with connections and confidence? But this time, I was building my evidence. I researched art authentication and documentation processes online, learning about the importance of work-in-progress photos, timestamps, and artistic provenance. I created a secret digital portfolio, uploading everything to a cloud service he couldn't access. The glow of my laptop screen cast eerie shadows as I worked. Each uploaded image felt like a small victory, a reclamation of what had always been mine. I documented not just the finished pieces, but every detail, my signature style in the brushstrokes, the specific color mixing techniques I developed, the emotional themes that ran through my work like a personal language. By dawn, I had created an unshakable record of my artistic identity. But as I was closing the laptop, a text message made my blood freeze. Marcus had promised 3 more of my pieces to his connections by the end of the week. The ticking clock of his betrayal had already begun. We got the gallery showing! Marcus burst through the studio door a week later, waving a contract like a victory flag. The papers rustled with his excitement, but I felt only dread pooling in my stomach. What gallery showing? I set down my brush, noting how the wet paint caught the afternoon light. In my previous life, this had been the moment everything began spiraling out of control. The Meridian Gallery downtown, David Chen, no relation to our neighbor, wants to feature our work in their monthly Emerging Artist Showcase. His eyes sparkled with the kind of ambition that used to make my heart race. Now it just made me nauseous. I knew what was coming next. Had lived through this exact conversation before. But I let him continue. Let him dig his own grave with his words. He loved the photos I sent him of our collaborative pieces. Said there's real potential for commercial success. Marcus spread the papers across my easel, blocking the canvas I'd been working on. The opening is in 2 weeks. This could be our big break, babe. Our collaborative pieces. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the contract over his shoulder. There it was, in black and white. Marcus Chen Collection, featuring pieces from the artist and his assistant. Assistant. The word sat bitter on my tongue like spoiled wine. Your assistant? I kept my voice carefully neutral, though inside I was screaming. Well, yeah, I mean, technically you'd be listed as my creative partner, but for the purposes of the showing, it makes more sense to present a unified artistic vision. David thinks it'll be more marketable. The musty smell of the old gallery space. I remembered it from my previous life. That particular combination of aged wood and artistic pretension seemed to fill my nostrils even though we weren't there yet. I'd stood in that exact space before, watching critics praise Marcus's emotional depth, while I smiled and nodded from the sidelines. So my paintings will be displayed under your name? Our names. It's about building the brand together, Maya. Think bigger picture here. He was already moving around the studio, selecting which pieces would make the best impression. His fingers lingered on my grandmother's portrait, the one he'd later claim represented his own family legacy. I forced myself to nod, to smile, to play the role of the supportive girlfriend. That sounds strategic. Exactly, you get it. He kissed my forehead with the casual affection of someone who believed he owned me. David wants to see everything by Friday so he can finalize the display. This is it, Maya. This is how we break into the real art world. The real art world. As if the countless hours I'd spent perfecting my craft, the emotions I'd poured onto canvas, the techniques I'd developed, as if none of that was real until it bore his name. After he left to network with other artists, which I knew meant drinking expensive coffee and positioning himself in the right social circles, I sat alone in the studio, surrounded by my life's work. The sound of my heartbeat seemed to echo off the walls, a rhythm of rage and determination. I picked up my phone and dialed the Meridian Gallery. Hello, this is Meridian Gallery. David speaking. Hi, David. This is Maya Rodriguez. I'm a journalist working on a piece about emerging artists in the local scene. The lie came easily, smoothly. I understand you're featuring Marcus Chen's work soon? Oh, yes. Fascinating artist. Very emotional, very authentic. His assistant has been helping him document his process, which shows real professionalism. Assistant. There was that word again, reducing me to a footnote in my own artistic story. Could you tell me more about his artistic background? I'm particularly interested in his influences and technique development. Well, that's interesting you ask. His style is quite unique, very reminiscent of some contemporary emotional realists, but with this raw quality that suggests personal trauma as inspiration. The brushwork is particularly distinctive, almost feminine in its sensitivity, if you don't mind me saying. Feminine in its sensitivity. I nearly laughed at the irony. My technique, developed through years of translating emotion into visual language, was being praised as an interesting quirk of Marcus's masculine artistic voice. And how long has he been developing this particular style? From what I understand, it really emerged in the last year or so. Quite a rapid artistic evolution. His assistant mentioned they've been collaborating closely on technique refinement. I ended the call with promises to send David a copy of the article when it was published. Then I sat in the silence of the studio, listening to the distant traffic and feeling the weight of history repeating itself. The metallic taste of betrayal sat heavy on my tongue. But this time, I had a plan. I created a social media account under the name Studio Insights and began posting time-lapse videos of my artistic process. Nothing too obvious, just an anonymous artist sharing their creative journey. I filmed myself working on pieces that would be in Marcus's show, careful to include clear shots of my distinctive techniques. The soft buzz of notifications became addictive as followers began discovering the account. Comments poured in praising the raw emotion and distinctive brushwork. Within days, I had thousands of followers watching my every creative move, but I kept my face out of frame, kept my identity secret, let the work speak for itself. The most satisfying moment came when I posted a time-lapse of the grandmother portrait, the centerpiece of Marcus's upcoming show. I captioned it simply, "Painting Memory and Loss, 3 months of work condensed into 60 seconds." The comments were immediate and passionate. "This is breathtaking, the emotion in every brushstroke. How do you capture grief so perfectly? The technique is incredible. Who is this artist?" As I watched the view count climb into the tens of thousands, my phone rang. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. "Maya, David just called me with some weird questions about my artistic process. Said someone had been asking about my background and influences. Do you know anything about this?" I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, the first cracks in his confident facade. "What kind of questions?" about how long I've been developing my current style, about my collaboration with my assistant. It's like someone's been investigating me. That's strange, I said, keeping my voice perfectly innocent. Maybe it's just standard gallery research? Maybe, but he didn't sound convinced. I just want to make sure we're on the same page about the story. We've been collaborative partners from the beginning, but I've been the driving creative force, okay? That's the narrative. The narrative, even his lies had become strategic performances. Of course, I agreed. Whatever you think is best. After I hung up, I smiled as I edited my next video. This one would show the specific brush technique I'd developed for rendering emotional depth. A technique that would be prominently featured in Marcus Chen's gallery debut. By the time the gallery opening arrived, half the art world would have seen my work being created. They just wouldn't know it yet. The phone rang again almost immediately. David Chen's voice was tight with concern. Marcus, I've been getting some interesting messages about the upcoming show. There's an anonymous artist account that's been posting work remarkably similar to your pieces. Same technique, same emotional resonance. I wanted to check if you know anything about this. I couldn't hear Marcus's response, but I could imagine his panic. The first domino had fallen and the rest would follow in beautiful, inevitable succession. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered against the kitchen floor, brown liquid spreading like spilled blood across the white tiles. On my phone screen, the auction catalog stared back at me with its pristine formatting and devastating betrayal. Lot 47. Grandmother's Hands. Oil on canvas, 24x 36 inches. Artist, Marcus Chen. Medium, oil on canvas. Est value, $15,000. $25,000. My grandmother's hands. The painting I'd created during the 3 weeks I'd spent caring for her before she died. Every wrinkle, every age spot, every tender line had been rendered with love and grief so raw it had taken me months to finish. The piece that captured her final words to me, "Your hands create magic, Mia. Don't let anyone dim that light." Marcus had entered it in the Whitmore Auction House, the most prestigious art auction in the city. Under his name, without my knowledge, without my permission. My hands shook as I scrolled through the catalog description. Chen's latest work demonstrates a profound maturity in emotional expression. The intricate detail and tender portrayal suggest deep personal connection to the subject matter. This piece represents a breakthrough in the artist's exploration of family legacy and loss. Family legacy. Loss. He was selling my grief, packaging my most intimate memories as his own artistic revelation. I could hear him in the shower, humming off-key as if this were just another ordinary morning. The sound of running water mixed with my ragged breathing as I knelt on the floor, picking up coffee-stained ceramic shards with trembling fingers, each piece cut like his lies, sharp and unexpected. When he emerged 20 minutes later, hair still damp and smelling of expensive shampoo, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the auction catalog open between us. "Explain this." My voice came out steadier than I felt. He glanced at the page and his face went through a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, calculation, then practiced innocence. "Oh, that. I was going to tell you today, actually. David Chen connected me with someone at Whitmore. They were looking for emotional contemporary pieces, and Grandmother's Hands fit perfectly. Under your name. Well, yes. Technically, legally, everything we create in this studio belongs to both of us. We're partners, Maya, common law artistic partnership." His words came out rehearsed, like he'd been practicing this conversation. "Show me the legal document that says that." "It doesn't need to be documented. We live together, we create together, we share resources. That's how partnerships work." His voice carried that condescending tone I remembered so well, the one that made me feel small and unreasonable for wanting basic respect. My grandmother, my grief, my 3 months of work. Each sentence landed like a blow. And your grandmother, who I drove you to visit every day? Who I helped you care for when she was dying? Who I comforted you about when she passed? He was building his narrative in real time, rewriting history to suit his needs. That painting came from our shared experience. The scent of his cologne, that expensive musk that used to make me feel protected, now made my stomach lurch with revulsion. He'd worn that same cologne the day we'd buried my grandmother, when I'd sobbed against his chest and thought I was lucky to have someone who understood my pain. Withdraw the piece from the auction? Absolutely not. Do you have any idea what this opportunity means? Whitmore has clients from around the world. This could launch our entire career. Our career. Built on my art, my emotion, my sleepless nights, and bleeding heart poured onto canvas. Then I'm going to the auction house myself. I'll tell them the truth. His face hardened. And say what? That your boyfriend's girlfriend is having a jealous breakdown? Maya, be reasonable. No one's going to believe that I somehow stole your artistic vision. Look at us objectively. I have the connections, the business knowledge, the presentation skills. You're talented, but talent isn't enough in this world. The threat was clear, even if he hadn't said it directly. Who would believe me? A girl with no formal art education, no gallery connections, no established reputation, claiming her more charismatic boyfriend had stolen her work? If you try to sabotage this auction, I'll have no choice but to ask you to find somewhere else to live and work. I can't be in a partnership with someone who doesn't trust me. There it was, the final manipulation. In my previous life, that threat had broken me completely. The thought of losing not just him, but access to the studio, to my paintings, to the life we'd built, it had made me crumble into apologies and promises to be more supportive. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Do what you need to do, I said quietly, then walked to the bedroom and started packing. The auction preview was held 3 days later at the Whitmore Gallery, a gleaming temple to wealth and taste in the city's art district. I stood in the crowd wearing a simple black dress and dark sunglasses, invisible among the collectors and critics who circulated like well-dressed vultures. My grandmother's hands hung on the wall in a place of honor, lit by expensive gallery lights that made the colors seem to glow from within. A small crowd had gathered around it, murmuring appreciatively about Chen's emotional depth and breakthrough technique. The brushwork is extraordinary, said a woman in pearls and Chanel. You can feel the artist's personal connection to the subject. Marcus Chen is definitely one to watch, agreed her companion, consulting his catalog. This piece shows real maturity. The way he captures the vulnerability of aging, it's almost feminine in its sensitivity. Feminine in its sensitivity. Again, that phrase that reduced my artistic voice to an interesting quirk of masculine creativity. I watched a renowned critic, Harrison Webb, whose reviews could make or break careers, examine the painting with the intensity of a scientist studying a specimen. He took notes, photographed details, spoke into his phone about emotional authenticity and technical mastery. My hands trembled as I pulled out my own phone and opened the Studio Insights account. Thousands of followers were waiting for my next post. This time, I wasn't going to be subtle. I hit Go Live and positioned the camera so it showed both my hands and a fresh canvas. Today I'm going to paint a portrait, I said to the growing audience. I want to show you how I capture memory and emotion in portraiture. As I began to work, I narrated the process, the same process I'd used to create the painting hanging 20 feet away. When painting hands, you have to understand that they tell stories. Every line, every shadow represents a life lived. This technique, building up layers of warmth and coolness, helps create the illusion of soft skin over weathered bone. The comments exploded. This is identical to the Marcus Chen technique. How does she know his process so well? Wait, this looks exactly like the piece at the Whitmore preview. Who is this artist? I continued painting, demonstrating the exact brush strokes, the precise color mixing, the emotional approach that had gone into my grandmother's portrait. Within an hour, I'd recreated the essential elements of the piece, narrating every choice as I made it. The key to emotional resonance, I said as I added the final details, is painting from true experience. These hands belong to my grandmother, who raised me after my parents died. She taught me that art isn't about technique, it's about truth. The viewer count hit 50,000. Screenshots of my stream began circulating on Twitter and Instagram. Art bloggers started sharing the video with captions like, "Mystery artist reveals Chen technique," and "Is this the real creator?" As I ended the stream, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Miss Rodriguez, this is Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell from the International Art Authentication Institute. I've been following your work on social media, and I have some questions about the Marcus Chen pieces currently at auction. Could we speak privately? The auction was scheduled for the next evening, but as I looked around the preview gallery, watching people examine my painting with new uncertainty in their eyes, I knew everything was about to change. The auctioneer's hammer would fall, but this time I wouldn't be the one getting crushed beneath it. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell's office smelled of old leather and expensive coffee, the kind of scent that whispered of serious money and serious consequences. She was a severe woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my appearance. "Miss Rodriguez," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her mahogany desk. "Thank you for coming so quickly." I settled into the leather chair, noting how it seemed to engulf me. A power play, perhaps, or maybe just expensive furniture designed to make clients feel small. "Your message said this was about art authentication." "Indeed." She opened a thick manila folder and spread several photographs across the desk. I recognized them immediately. Screenshots from my Studio Insights videos, side-by-side comparisons with auction catalog images. "Your social media demonstrations have raised some very interesting questions about provenance and artistic attribution." My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. "I just like to share artistic techniques, educational content." Her lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Miss Rodriguez, I specialize in cases of artistic fraud and misattribution. In my 30 years of experience, I've learned to recognize when an artist's true signature, not the one written in paint, but the one embedded in every brushstroke, doesn't match the credited creator." She pulled out a magnifying glass and handed me one of the photographs. "Look at the brushwork in this detail shot from the Marcus Chen auction piece. Now look at this screenshot from your live stream. The pressure patterns, the directional flow, the layering technique, they're not just similar, they're identical." The blood rushed in my ears like ocean waves. Similar techniques aren't uncommon among artists who've studied together, yes, but this goes deeper. She opened her laptop and pulled up a video analysis. "I've had my team run digital forensics on your stream footage. The muscle memory, the automatic movements, the way you hold your brush, these are signatures that can't be faked or learned. They're as unique as fingerprints." I stared at the screen, watching my own hands recreate my grandmother's portrait in microscopic detail. The way my wrist turned at a specific angle, the rhythm of my brushstrokes, the unconscious way I mixed colors, all of it captured and analyzed like evidence at a crime scene. "Miss Rodriguez, I don't think you've been recreating Marcus Chen's technique. I think Marcus Chen has been stealing yours." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. In my previous life, no one had believed me. I'd died unknown, uncredited, forgotten. But this woman, this expert in artistic truth, she saw what others had missed. "There's something else," Dr. Hartwell continued, her voice gentler now. "The reason I reached out to you specifically, I represent the estate of Edmund Rodriguez, my great-uncle. I remembered him vaguely from childhood, a mysterious figure who sent birthday cards with expensive art books inside, who lived alone in a mansion on the other side of the city. My mother had always spoken of him with a mixture of respect and bewilderment, calling him the rich artist who never married. Uncle Edmund died 3 weeks ago," she continued. "He left very specific instructions about his estate. Apparently, he'd been following your work." Following my work? That was impossible. I'd barely shown my art to anyone except Marcus. "Through your social media initially, then through more direct observation." She pulled out another folder, this one containing printed emails and bank statements. "Your uncle was a shrewd businessman as well as an artist. He hired private investigators to research your background, your living situation, your relationship with Marcus Chen." My hands went cold. He was having me watched? He was protecting his legacy. "You see, Miss Rodriguez, your uncle left you everything. His estate, valued at approximately $50 million. His private art collection, worth another $20 million. And his name, which carries considerable weight in the international art community." The room spun slightly. $50 million. My great-uncle, whom I'd barely known, had left me a fortune. "But there's a condition," Dr. Hartwell continued. You must prove your artistic legitimacy within 30 days of his death. He was very specific about this. He wanted to ensure his inheritance went to a true artist, not someone who would simply sell everything and squander the money. How do I prove artistic legitimacy? By demonstrating that your work is original, that you're the sole creator of pieces attributed to you, and that you haven't been dependent on others for your artistic vision. She leaned forward. Miss Rodriguez, your uncle suspected that Marcus Chen was exploiting you. His investigation revealed that virtually every piece in Chen's portfolio matches your artistic signature. I thought about the auction happening tomorrow night, about Marcus selling my grief to the highest bidder while I sat powerless to stop him, about the gallery showing where my work would hang under his name, about the years of manipulation and theft that had destroyed my previous life. What happens if I can't prove my legitimacy? The estate goes to charity, but Miss Rodriguez, based on what I've seen, proof won't be the issue. The question is what you plan to do with the truth once it's officially established. She handed me a key, old brass, heavy in my palm. This opens the warehouse where your uncle stored his collection. I think you'll find it illuminating. The warehouse was vast and climate-controlled, filled with paintings from floor to ceiling. But it wasn't just the monetary value that took my breath away. It was the story the collection told. My uncle had collected works by artists who'd been undervalued in their lifetimes, whose genius had gone unrecognized until after their deaths. Van Gogh sold one painting while alive, I whispered to myself, staring at a small canvas that would now be worth millions. Emily Dickinson published fewer than a dozen poems before she died. Among the collection, I found a handwritten note in my uncle's careful script. Maya, by the time you read this, I hope you'll have found the courage to claim what's yours. I've watched you create beauty while others claimed credit. I've seen your authentic voice being silenced by those who lack the talent to develop their own. This collection is my gift to you, but more than that, it's my challenge. Don't let them bury your light. The world needs to see what you can really do. Edmund. At the bottom of the note was a phone number and the words, "Call this number when you're ready to fight back." I dialed the number with shaking fingers. Rodriguez Estate Services. This is James. This is Maya Rodriguez. My uncle left me a note with this number. Miss Rodriguez, we've been expecting your call. How quickly do you need to liquidate assets for purchases? Liquidate assets? For purchases? My uncle hadn't just left me money, he'd left me the power to buy back my own stolen life. There's an auction tomorrow night, I said slowly. I need to make some acquisitions. Certainly. What's your budget? I looked around the warehouse at decades of collected masterpieces, at the legacy of a man who understood what it meant to be overlooked and undervalued. Whatever it takes, I said. That night, I sat in the mansion I'd inherited, surrounded by paintings worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. The weight of possibility pressed down on me like a physical force. I had the resources now to expose Marcus, to reclaim my work, to build the artistic reputation I'd always deserved. But first, I was going to let him have his moment of triumph. Let him think he'd won, that he'd successfully auctioned off my soul to the highest bidder. Because the higher the price, the more devastating his fall would be. I opened my laptop and began researching shell companies and anonymous bidding procedures. By dawn, I had everything in place. Marcus had taught me about the art world's obsession with narrative, with the story behind the painting. Well, I was about to give them a story they'd never forget. The auction house buzzed with the energy of serious money changing hands. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled crowd of collectors, critics, and curiosity seekers, all gathered to witness what the Whitmore catalog had billed as an evening of exceptional contemporary acquisitions. I sat in the back row wearing a simple black suit and oversized sunglasses, invisible among the sea of expensive outfits and confident voices. My phone was positioned discreetly on my lap, ready to document everything that was about to unfold. Marcus stood near the front, radiating nervous excitement as he spoke with potential buyers. His new suit, paid for with pre-auction sales of my smaller pieces, fit him perfectly. He'd slicked his hair back and practiced his humble artist's smile in the mirror that morning, not knowing I'd been watching from the doorway. "Lot 47, called the auctioneer, and my grandmother's hands appeared on the large screen beside the podium. Marcus Chen's grandmother's hands, oil on canvas, 24 by 36 inches. Bidding opens at $10,000. My heart hammered against my ribs as hands began rising around the room. 10,000 became 15, then 20. The auctioneer's voice rang out over the crowd's murmurs, calling out increments that represented more money than I'd ever seen in my previous life. 25,000, 30, 35. Marcus's face glowed with triumph. He'd probably never imagined my painting. His painting, in his mind, would fetch such prices. I watched him accept congratulations from nearby attendees, watched him nod modestly when someone praised his emotional maturity as an artist. The bidding slowed at 40,000. The auctioneer called for final bids, his gavel raised to close the lot. That's when I activated the phone I'd given to James, my uncle's estate manager. He sat 3 rows ahead of me, dressed in an expensive suit that made him blend perfectly with the other serious collectors. 50,000, James called out, his voice carrying clearly through the room. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus's eyes widened, searching for the source of the new bid. 60,000, countered the previous high bidder, a woman in pearls who'd been eyeing the painting all evening. 75,000. James didn't hesitate. The room fell silent except for the soft scratching of the auctioneer's pen. $75,000 for an emerging artist's work was unprecedented for a Whitmore auction. 80,000. The woman tried, but her voice carried less confidence now. 100,000. James's bid rang out like a challenge. Complete silence. Even the auctioneer paused, clearly not expecting such aggressive bidding on a relatively unknown artist's work. Going once at $100,000, he called. Going twice. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through my bones. Sold for $100,000 to bidder number 247. I watched Marcus's face transform through a series of emotions: shock, joy, confusion, and finally, a kind of manic excitement. He'd just sold my painting for more money than most artists saw in their entire careers, but I wasn't done. The next 3 lots were also my pieces, listed under Marcus's name. James bought each one for increasingly ridiculous amounts. $85,000 for a landscape I'd painted in 2 weeks, $120,000 for an abstract piece that had taken me a month to complete, $95,000 for a still life that Marcus had dismissed as practice work just 6 months ago. By the time the auction ended, the mysterious bidder, number 247, had spent over $400,000 on the complete Marcus Chen collection. The art world was buzzing. Who was this anonymous collector willing to pay such extraordinary prices for an emerging artist? Marcus found me in the lobby afterward, his face flushed with champagne and disbelief. "Maya, can you believe this? $400,000. We're rich." He grabbed my hands, spinning me around like we were celebrating together. "The buyer wants to remain anonymous, but David Chen says they're interested in commissioning more work. This is it. This is our breakthrough." Our breakthrough, built entirely on my stolen labor. "That's incredible," I said, forcing excitement into my voice. "What happens next?" David's setting up meetings with gallery owners from New York, Los Angeles, even London. Everyone wants to know about the artist who commanded such prices at auction. His eyes sparkled with ambition. "We need to start planning the next collection immediately. Strike while the iron's hot." The next collection. More of my work to be sold under his name. More of my artistic voice to be packaged as his vision. "Actually," I said carefully, "I think we need to talk about something first." But before I could continue, a woman approached us. Tall, elegant, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of our interaction. "Mr. Chen," she extended a manicured hand. "I'm Margaret Whitfield from the Whitfield Gallery in Manhattan. I represent some of the most prestigious contemporary artists in the world." Marcus straightened immediately, slipping into his practiced charm. "Miss Whitfield, what an honor. I'm familiar with your gallery's reputation, of course. I was at the auction tonight. Quite impressive prices for an emerging artist. I'd like to discuss representation." I watched Marcus's face light up like a child on Christmas morning. The Whitfield Gallery represented artists whose single pieces sold for millions. This was the validation he'd always craved, the legitimacy that would cement his place in art history. "I'd be very interested in that conversation," he said. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant schedule something for next week. But I do have one request." Her eyes shifted to me, studying my face with uncomfortable intensity. "I'd like to meet the mysterious collector who drove up tonight's prices. Anonymous bidders make the market nervous, Mr. Chen. We need to ensure there's legitimate interest in your work, not just market manipulation." Marcus's confident smile faltered slightly. "I'm sure that can be arranged, though of course I don't have direct contact with the buyer myself." "Of course." Margaret's smile was razor sharp. "I'll expect to hear from you soon. And Mr. Chen, I'll be doing my own authentication review of the pieces that sold tonight. Standard procedure for artists I'm considering representing." She walked away, leaving Marcus staring after her with a mixture of excitement and growing unease. "Authentication review?" he asked, though I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or himself. "Probably just standard gallery procedures," I said. "Making sure the pieces are genuine, checking provenance, that sort of thing." "Right, of course." But his hand was shaking slightly as he reached for his champagne glass. That night, I sat in my inherited mansion, surrounded by paintings worth millions, and made a phone call. "Margaret, it's Maya Rodriguez. Are you ready to see the rest of the story?" "I've been waiting for your call," came the crisp reply. "Dr. Hartwell filled me in on the authentication issues. Tomorrow morning, I'll need to see your documentation." "All of it?" "Everything. Process videos, timestamps, preliminary sketches, color studies. If Marcus Chen has been selling your work under his name, the art world needs to know." I looked around the vast room at my uncle's collection of undervalued artists who'd died before receiving recognition. At the note he'd left me, challenging me to fight for my voice. "Margaret, I want to do more than just expose him. I want to make sure this never happens to another artist." "What do you have in mind?" "A press conference, full documentation, and I want to announce the establishment of the Edmund Rodriguez Foundation for Exploited Artists. Use part of my inheritance to create legal resources for artists whose work has been stolen." The silence on the other end stretched for a long moment. "Maya, that would destroy Marcus Chen's career completely. Are you prepared for that level of public attention? For the media scrutiny that will follow?" I thought about my previous life, dying alone and uncredited while Marcus built his reputation on my bones. I thought about other artists out there right now, being manipulated and exploited by people who saw talent as something to harvest rather than nurture. "I'm ready," I said. "It's time to stop hiding." "Then let's give the art world a story they'll never forget." The press conference was scheduled for the following Friday at the Meridian Gallery, the same space where Marcus had planned to debut our collaborative work. The irony was perfect. But first, I had one final performance to give. Marcus showed up at my inherited mansion 3 days before the press conference, though he didn't know about the press conference yet. The media had only announced a significant revelation regarding recent auction irregularities and questions of artistic attribution in the contemporary market. I watched him through the security camera as he stood on the front steps, clearly awed by the grandeur of the house he'd never known I'd inherited. His finger hovered over the doorbell for a full minute before he finally pressed it. The sound echoed through the marble foyer like a death knell. When I opened the door, his face cycled through confusion, shock, and finally a desperate kind of hope. "Maya, Jesus, this place is incredible. Whose house is this?" He peered past me into the foyer, taking in the crystal chandelier and the oil paintings that lined the walls. "Are you house-sitting for someone?" "It's mine," I said simply. "My great-uncle died and left it to me." His eyes widened. "Your great-uncle was rich. Why didn't you ever mention—" Then understanding dawned, and with it panic. "Maya, we need to talk. There are some rumors going around about authentication issues with the auction pieces. Nothing serious, but Margaret Whitfield wants to do some kind of investigation." I stepped aside and let him enter, watching as he took in the scope of wealth that surrounded him. His shoes, expensive ones I'd never seen before, made soft clicking sounds against the polished marble that seemed to irritate my nerves. "Authentication issues," I repeated. "What kind of issues?" "Something about brushwork analysis and artistic signatures. It's probably nothing, but he trailed off, his eyes catching on a particular painting. A Van Gogh sketch worth more than he'd make in a lifetime. Maya, this inheritance, this changes everything. We could use this money to really establish ourselves, buy gallery space, commission critics, build a legitimate artistic empire. We, us, our empire, built on my inheritance and my stolen work. I led him to the sitting room, where afternoon light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. He perched on the edge of an antique chair that probably cost more than most people's cars, his body language screaming nervous energy. Marcus, I need you to understand something. Those authentication concerns aren't going away. In fact, they're about to get much more serious. His face went pale. What do you mean? I mean that Margaret Whitfield isn't the only one asking questions. The International Art Authentication Institute is also investigating, along with several major art publications. I kept my voice calm, matter of fact. There's going to be a press conference on Friday. A press conference about what? But even as he asked, I could see the knowledge creeping into his eyes. About artistic theft. About the systematic exploitation of artists by people who claim to be their partners. I leaned back in my chair, the soft leather supporting me like an embrace. About how Marcus Chen built his entire reputation on work he didn't create. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, the tick of an antique clock on the mantel, the rapid rhythm of his breathing. Maya, his voice came out strangled. You can't be serious. We're partners. Everything we've built together. Show me one piece you created entirely by yourself. That's not how artistic partnerships work. Show me your preliminary sketches, your color studies, your technique development over time. Each demand hit him like a physical blow. Show me anything that proves you're capable of creating the work that bears your name. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window with jerky, panicked movements. You're being ridiculous. This is some kind of breakdown, Maya. The stress of the money, the sudden change in circumstances, it's making you paranoid. But his hands were shaking as he gripped the window frame. I have video documentation of myself creating every piece you've sold, I said quietly. Time-stamped, authenticated, verified by multiple experts. I have preliminary sketches dating back years. I have witnesses who can testify to my artistic process. He spun around, and for the first time since I'd known him, his mask dropped completely. What I saw underneath was uglier than I'd remembered. Pure, desperate selfishness. Fine, he snapped. Fine, maybe you did most of the technical work, but I provided the vision, the connections, the business acumen. You think you could have sold those pieces without me? You think anyone would have paid attention to some unknown girl with no gallery representation? There it was. The truth he'd been hiding behind pretty words about partnership and collaboration. You're right, I said. I probably couldn't have sold them, but that's because you made sure I couldn't. You isolated me from the art community, convinced me I needed you to succeed, sold my work before I could establish my own reputation. I gave you opportunities you never would have had otherwise. You stole my voice and sold it back to me as a favor. His pacing became more frantic, and I caught the scent of his sweat mixing with that expensive cologne. Fear had a smell, I realized. Sharp and acrid, like metal in the rain. Maya, listen to me. We can fix this. We can come up with a story that works for everyone. Say we were collaborative partners, that the attribution was unclear because we worked so closely together. His words came faster now, desperation making him sloppy. You have money now, real money. We could buy our way out of this. Pay off the investigators, the journalists, make it go away. And then what? Continue the same pattern with new work? No, we'll be completely transparent going forward. Equal credit, equal profits. Hell, we'll make you the primary artist and I'll be the business manager. Whatever you want. I studied his face, seeing the calculation behind the panic. He was already planning how to manipulate this new dynamic, how to use my inheritance to build an even more profitable empire of deception. There's just one problem with your plan, I said. What? I don't want to work with you anymore. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. He stopped pacing, stopped breathing, stopped moving entirely. What do you mean? I mean, no, Marcus. No to the cover up. No to the collaboration. No to pretending any of this was ever a partnership. I stood up, feeling the weight of my great uncle's legacy settling around my shoulders like armor. I'm going to tell the truth at that press conference. All of it. And then I'm going to build the artistic career I always deserved without you. His face went through a series of transformations: disbelief, anger, and finally, pure rage. You ungrateful bitch, he snarled. I made you. Without me, you'd still be painting in obscurity, selling nothing, being nothing, and this is how you repay me? I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. You didn't make me, Marcus. You just convinced me I was small enough to fit in your shadow. Before I could say anything else, the doorbell rang again. Through the window, I could see a familiar figure on the steps. Lisa, Marcus's sister, the woman who'd been my friend before she chose family loyalty over truth. Are you expecting someone? Marcus asked, his voice still tight with anger. Not exactly. I went to answer the door, hearing his footsteps following me across the marble. Lisa stood on the threshold looking haggard, her usually perfect makeup smeared and her clothes wrinkled. The familiar scent of her perfume, something floral and expensive, brought back memories of late-night conversations and shared secrets. Maya, she said, her voice breaking slightly, we need to talk. Lisa, what are you doing here? Marcus pushed past me, his protective instincts kicking in despite everything. How did you even know where to find us? I've been trying to reach you for 2 days, she said, looking between us with desperate eyes. The gallery called, and the auction house, and 3 different journalists. Her voice rose with each word. Marcus, they're saying you stole Maya's work. They're saying there's going to be criminal charges. Criminal charges. I hadn't considered that possibility, but it made sense. Art fraud was a serious crime, especially when it involved the kind of money Marcus had been dealing with. It's going to be fine, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maya and I are working it out. Aren't we, Maya? Both of them looked at me, waiting for my response. Lisa's eyes were pleading, desperate. She'd always known, I realized. Maybe not the full extent, but she'd known Marcus was taking credit for work he hadn't done. I'm sorry, Lisa, I said quietly. But no, we're not working it out. Her face crumpled. Maya, please. I know Marcus made mistakes, but he's learned his lesson. Haven't you, Marcus? Tell her you've learned your lesson. I've learned my lesson, Marcus parroted, but the words sounded hollow. He owes money to some very dangerous people, Lisa continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. The gallery representation, the auction house fees, the marketing costs, he borrowed against future sales. If his reputation is destroyed, if the collectors demand their money back. She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Marcus hadn't just been stealing my art, he'd been gambling with money he didn't have, building debt on the assumption that my work would continue funding his lifestyle. That's not my problem, I said. Please, Lisa begged. Just say it was collaborative work, just give him that much. You have all this money now, you don't need the art sales. But Marcus has nothing else. I looked at both of them, the man who'd stolen my artistic soul and the woman who'd watched him do it. They stood in my inherited mansion, surrounded by the legacy of an uncle who'd understood what it meant to be exploited and forgotten, and they asked me to sacrifice my truth to save their lies. No, I said. The word fell between us like a stone into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this moment. No, Lisa's voice cracked. No, I won't lie to protect him. I won't pretend this was collaboration. I won't sacrifice my artistic integrity to save his reputation, or his debts, or his future. I looked directly at Marcus, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. You made your choices, Marcus. Every time you signed my name as yours, every time you sold my work without asking, every time you convinced me I was lucky to have you, those were your choices. Now live with the consequences. Lisa started crying then, soft sobs that shook her shoulders. Marcus's face had gone completely white. Maya, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, please, I'm begging you. You should have begged me the first time you stole my work. You should have asked my permission the first time you sold my paintings. You should have given me credit the first time someone praised your technique. I stepped back, creating physical distance between us. But you didn't, because you never saw me as a person whose feelings mattered. I was just a resource to be harvested. I walked to the door and opened it, the gesture unmistakable. I think you should leave now. They stood there for a moment longer, Lisa still crying, Marcus staring at me like I was a stranger. Finally, he took his sister's arm and led her toward the door. "This isn't over," he said as they reached the threshold. "Yes," I replied quietly. "It is." I watched them walk down the marble steps and get into Lisa's car. As they drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in either of my lives. Complete, absolute peace. 6 months later, I stood in the main gallery of the Maya Rodriguez Contemporary Art Museum, the space I'd purchased and renovated with part of my inheritance. The opening reception for my first solo exhibition hummed with conversation, the soft classical music mixing with the clink of champagne glasses and the rustle of expensive clothing. But this wasn't the same desperate energy of Marcus's auction night. This felt different, respectful, genuine, celebratory rather than acquisitive. "The brushwork in this piece is extraordinary," I heard a critic say to her companion as they studied my grandmother's hands, the painting I'd bought back and donated to my own museum with full attribution. "Rodriguez has such an authentic voice. You can feel the personal connection in every stroke." My authentic voice. The phrase made me smile as I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions about my work. Reporters circulated with cameras and notepads, documenting what art magazines were calling the most significant debut in contemporary art this decade. The scandal had broken exactly as I'd planned. The press conference had been a sensation, with Dr. Hartwell presenting irrefutable evidence of artistic theft while I sat calmly beside her, answering questions with the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. The art world had responded with shock, outrage, and ultimately a hunger to celebrate the real artist behind the stolen work. Marcus's career had imploded within a week. Gallery representation withdrawn, auction houses blacklisting him, collectors demanding refunds for pieces they now knew weren't authentic. The criminal charges were still pending, but his artistic reputation was already beyond recovery. "Miss Rodriguez?" A young woman approached me, holding a business card and looking nervous. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm Jessica Chen, a graduate student at the Art Institute. I'm working on my thesis about artistic exploitation and women artists. Would you be willing to speak at our symposium next month?" "Of course," I said, taking her card. "I'd be honored." This happened almost daily now, young artists reaching out, asking for advice, sharing their own stories of exploitation, and asking how to protect themselves. I'd established the Edmund Rodriguez Foundation exactly for this purpose, providing legal resources and advocacy for artists whose work had been stolen or misattributed. The morning light streamed through the museum's floor-to-ceiling windows as I walked through the galleries before opening hours, my footsteps echoing softly in the peaceful space. I'd designed it as much for working artists as for visitors, with studio spaces, workshops, and a resource center where artists could learn about contracts, copyright law, and fair market pricing. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Hartwell. "Saw the Times review. Your uncle would be proud." The review had been glowing, but more importantly, it had been fair. The critic had focused on the art itself rather than the scandal, analyzing my technique and artistic development with the kind of serious attention I'd always craved. I'd moved into a smaller house near the museum, selling the mansion but keeping my uncle's art collection on permanent loan to institutions around the world. The space was bright and airy, with a studio that faced east to catch the morning light. The scent of coffee and oil paints had become my daily ritual, replacing the anxiety and tension that had defined my previous existence. Some evenings I visited my grandmother's grave, bringing photos of the exhibitions and awards that now bore both our names. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees like whispered approval, and I would tell her about the foundation, about the young artists we were helping, about the voice I'd finally found. "Your hands create magic, mija," I would whisper, placing fresh flowers on her grave. And now the whole world knows it. The foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. We'd helped dozens of artists recover stolen work, provided legal assistance for contract negotiations, and created scholarship programs for emerging artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. The art world was slowly changing, becoming more conscious of the power dynamics that had allowed exploitation to flourish for so long. Marcus's name rarely came up in art circles anymore. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd left the city trying to rebuild his life in some other industry. Lisa had sent me a single email months ago, an apology that felt genuine but came too late to matter. I deleted it without responding. I didn't think about them often anymore. The anger had faded, replaced by something much more powerful: purpose. As I stood in my studio that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I picked up my brush to begin a new piece. This one wasn't born from pain or revenge, or the need to prove anything to anyone. This one came from pure joy, from the simple pleasure of creating something beautiful and true. The canvas waited before me, blank and full of infinite possibility. I dipped my brush in paint and made the first mark, bold, confident, entirely my own. In the corner of the canvas, I signed my name with pride: Maya Rodriguez. No hidden meanings, no stolen identity, no borrowed glory. Just my name, my art, my voice, finally free to sing. The brush moved across the canvas like it was dancing, creating something new and beautiful in mine. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility, and inside my studio, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the evidence of my talent, I painted my future one brushstroke at a time. This time, no one would steal my light. This time, I was finally, fully, undeniably myself, and it was more than enough.